Hello and welcome once again to The Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jaime Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We ask, as always, that you like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. You can tell your friends they can hear it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. You name it, it is out there. A great show lined up for you today. Today's guest is the person who blew the lid off the Tim Hortons paper lid experiment that failed so miserably. Thank you very much, Leanne Rood, the Member of Parliament for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me today, Jamie.
Do you want to quickly talk about this little lid experiment that Tim Hortons had going on that you, I guess, blew up the internet with?
Well, it was meant actually just to bring to attention some of the policies of this current NDP Liberal government and how nonsensical they are. And we see companies trying to do good, and I don't want to the intent wasn't to slam Tim Hortons for trying to do good. It was actually about the plastics ban that the Liberal NDP government wants to extend beyond just a paper straw or banning a plastic straw or banning your grocery bags. They actually want to extend it to fresh fruits and vegetables and banning them from being wrapped in plastic or shipped in plastic containers. And that was what that was meant to do, is to just draw attention to that. And it certainly did. And I apologize to any Tim Hortons owners that were offended by that. But it was just something that was meant to bring to the attention that we do have recycling programs in this country. We do need to actually expand those. We have the brightest minds in the country here, the brightest engineers. We have companies who are already working on recycling plastics and actually expanding the recycling programs. But instead, the NDP Liberal government doesn't want to give them credit, doesn't want to help expand recycling programs in Canada. So they're asking for alternatives. And what I was trying to say is there is a place and a time for plastic, and there's a place and a time for compostable items. And when we talk about our food supply system, this is not the place to start with a plastics ban on fresh fruit and vegetables.
Well, I think this dovetails nicely into the topic today, which is just general unaffordability across Canada. This Liberal government has come up with one policy after another. They've added on so much debt. The interest payments are more than we transfer to the provinces for health care. Pretty much every cent we collect in the HST, the GST, the federal portion, goes to pay interest on our debt. That is actually burdening future generations worse. It's the invisible side that people don't necessarily see in their day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. And, being home the last couple of weeks and with my constituents and talking with young people, they're really feeling hopeless right now. They're feeling that they are never going to have the opportunities that their parents had or their grandparents had for a better life. They aren't even dreaming of owning a home anymore. They're just dreaming of finding a way to make enough money at their jobs. And some of them have very good paying jobs in the trades, so they can move out of their parents' basement and find something to rent. And it's a very sad situation that we see our country in right now, with people struggling to afford food. That's one of the biggest complaints that I hear across the board, whether it's seniors, folks who are on disability, single moms and single parent families. They're struggling to put food on the table right now while working full time and struggling to keep that roof over their head.
We have a few clips that we're going to get to momentarily, but this is the thinking of this Liberal NDP government, right? It is, people are struggling because of the pain caused by government, okay? All of this is created by government. So some people, like the Liberals, just want to start from, here's the start line, right? People are suffering, they're miserable. But you got to rewind the clock a bit to figure out how we got here so we don't keep making the same mistakes. The problem the Liberals are doing is it's one program to fix the problem that was created by them, right? Like, the solution to one failed government program is another government program, and we'll just keep going on and on and on. The issue being that it will never work, but more so that any cost bared on any new program is on the credit card.
Exactly. And one prime example of that is, for instance, the carbon tax. The carbon tax is making everything more expensive, especially when we talk about food for Canadians. The cost to grow the food becomes more because farmers aren't just using tractors to haul wagons and things around anymore. And yes, they are exempt from some taxes when they pay for that fuel. They're using transport trucks now because of the volume that they're moving around, and they're paying the carbon tax on that. So when the farmer costs more to grow the food, and if you think about all of the steps in the supply chain to get even even the packaging for that food to the farm, everybody's paying more. And eventually the consumer is going to have to pay more at the grocery store because of that tax. And that's just one example of making food unaffordable for Canadians and making not just food, but everything else more unaffordable. Heating your home, if you have a natural gas furnace, like a lot of people in our rural areas and up in the north are using to heat in the cold, it's costing more and more and more money because of failed NDP Liberal policies that are not doing anything to actually help the environment or bring down our emissions right now.
Let's cue up cut one. This is a news report that talks about the ongoing unaffordability crisis. The affordability crisis, actually. Everything is unaffordable now, thanks to this government. But this just paints the picture, and then we'll get into a bit more. Play cut one.
According to Food Banks Canada, 1 in 4 Canadians are experiencing food insecurity, while nearly half of those surveyed feel they are doing worse financially than they were a year ago. Food Banks Canada released its annual poverty report card, a look at the challenges facing Canadians and how well governments are responding to them. Most provincial governments received grades in the D range, while 7 out of 10 got a D- for what the report called an insufficient approach to poverty reduction.
So we have an estimated 2 million visits to the food bank in March of last year. Last year, 2 million visits. It's a 32% increase over 2022, and that was March 2023, according to Food Banks Canada. This is extremely concerning when you look at the number of people who are going to a food bank for the first time, like to cross that threshold to the point where just a few years ago you were living a normal life, right? You were able to pay your bills, get your groceries, heck, maybe even take a vacation if you were so lucky. But now it's come to the point where just regular, normal, working folks are going to the food bank, are making that decision that they need help.
Absolutely, and that's because the cost of everything else is so expensive as well. And the food bank is somewhere they can go for help when they need to buy food. But unfortunately, what we're going to see going forward in the future under this NDP Liberal government is food's going to actually increase, especially fresh food. We've heard from the produce growers, they had an independent study done actually on the cost of fresh fruit and vegetables. And if the NDP Liberal government goes ahead with the plastics ban for produce, we're going to see a potentially increase in fresh food by another 34%. We're also going to see a 50% increase in food waste, a 50% increase in greenhouse gas emissions, and it's going to cost the economy and our provinces over $1 billion a year in increased healthcare costs because people can't afford the fresh food that they need for nourishment. And this is just another failed policy, and it just has so many repercussions down the line that we won't see for potentially years, but it adds to the unaffordability crisis that we have in this country right now.
And instead of the Liberals rethinking their plans, it'll be another government program, I have no doubt.
Well, and we've seen that with the National School Food Lunch Program. That's another example. Parents can't afford to feed their kids at home, so the government needs to create a program to help feed the kids at school because parents aren't affording food for their kids. It's fixing another broken government program with another broken government program.
Yeah, whereas if you just rewound a bit and actually looked at your policies that put us in this spot we're in now, you might be able to reverse that, then allow people to have more money in their pockets to do what they do best, which is spend it on their priorities. It's that simple.
Absolutely, very simple.
It's common sense. It is common sense. All right, we're gonna queue up cut 2 here because we got our leader Pierre Poilievre asking for a bit of relief, passing a bill that's in the Senate now that'll give farmers some relief, which will hopefully then lower some prices.
We have lineups at our food banks that if you put the images in black and white, you would just assume you were looking at images from the Great Depression. There's a common sense conservative bill, C-234, that is passed to the Senate. The Prime Minister's ministers are panicking and begging senators to block it. Will the Prime Minister tell his senators that they have go-ahead to pass this common-sense conservative bill so our farmers can feed our people?
It's amazing that pretty much every government provincially across this country are looking at ways of giving people a break, reducing taxes. Even the NDP government in Manitoba released some of the tax and pulled back some of their provincial taxes to give people a bit of a break that were suffering. Every government except this federal government.
Absolutely. And C-234 is a bill that's meant to help farmers, again, reduce the costs that it costs them to produce food for Canadians. And if we don't find ways to reduce costs for farmers, if we don't find ways to keep farmers in business, we're going to have a shortage of farmers growing fresh food in this country. And it's going to actually contribute more to food insecurity because we do import 2/3 of our fresh food into the country already. And without our farmers, we don't have the food that we want and what we need to feed Canadians and the world. So this is one common sense bill that will help farmers reduce the input costs, reduce the costs to consumers for what they pay for their food.
But if people start relying on their own systems, right, their own ability to provide for their families and their friends and maybe some charity, then the Liberal politicians don't have an avenue to go to the public to say, hey, we can fix this problem. Again, starting the history right at that moment, forgetting about how they actually got here. And this is the unfortunate part that the Liberals have figured out, that they can keep going to the polls to say, we'll fix that problem. But again, there's been a lack of accountability, I think, on the past, on how we actually got here.
Absolutely. And if we look at the statistics tell us right now our national food insecurity rate is nearly 23% in this country. And I can tell you it wasn't that 9 years before we had Trudeau as the Prime Minister and the NDP Liberal government. We see 1/3 of Canadians are experiencing inadequate standard of living, and even more people are saying that it's actually more than inadequate standard of living. But again, it goes back to the NDP Liberal policies that have created the mess that this country is in, making everything completely unaffordable.
It's also called the Tytler cycle. Lord Alexander Tytler, a Scottish politician back in the day, talked about this, how politicians can then create the problem and go to their constituents at election time to say, hey, we will fix the problem, right? So it's the easiest thing to do for the government to get the heck out of the way and allow people to do what they do best.
Exactly. And actually, one more thing to add to that, too, is 3 years ago, we started talking about a grocery code of conduct. And I started talking about that in the House of Commons, and industry got together. We've gotten all the provinces together working on this code of conduct. And right now we're waiting for Walmart. Walmart is one of the big 5 grocers that has not signed on to the code of conduct yet. And what that code of conduct is going to do is actually help farmers get paid properly for the goods that they are supplying to the grocery stores. Because again, it all ties back. If we can make it less expensive for farmers to produce the food, then it will cost consumers less. But the grocery chains for years and years have been charging farmers fees and fines and making it so expensive that they're hardly getting any money back for the goods that they're selling in grocery stores. And that's what this code of conduct is going to do. Make sure small suppliers, farmers get paid adequately by these chain stores that hold this oligopoly of control over the grocery business in Canada. And so we need to get Walmart to sign on to this. Loblaws last week finally said that they would sign on to the code. So if we can get Walmart onto the code and we get Costco onto the code, then we'll see farmers actually get paid better for the goods that they're selling to the grocery stores.
What
and
was
it'll be better for
Walmart's
them.
excuse? Why won't they sign?
Well, we're not sure. They think that a code is a good idea, but we're not sure at this point why they're not wanting to sign. So we need to see them get on board with this, treat our farmers fairly. Let's make sure that we keep our farmers in business in this country to feed Canadians and keep prices low for Canadians.
I think most Canadians know that a lot of our farmers are aging out, right? They're getting to the point where they're not able to continue. The issue has been going on for a few decades now, but actually reaching a tipping point now because of the situation we're in now. In order to attract farmers or anybody to a specific field, there has to be a hope of seeing return, making a living, right? And agriculture has been just punished just relentlessly by governments over the years, right? More rules, more regulation, more red tape, making it harder for them to actually do what they do best, which is grow our food, make our food.
Absolutely.
And it's become more unattractive for the younger generation because who wants to break your back 7 days a week and then still struggle to make a living yourself?
Well, you nailed it. I often say farmers are the biggest gamblers that there are out there because they rely on Mother Nature to provide them with the right growing conditions, the right weather, the right heat. And then they have to deal with the bureaucracy of the government in impeding them from actually doing their job. At every turn, there's more paperwork and more paperwork to fill out now instead of just getting out of the way. Government needs to get out of the way. Yes, we have to have controls in place to make it so that we are regulated and we have some of the highest standards in the world. but farmers need to be able to actually go to the fields and grow and not spend their time doing bookwork in an office to meet some government bureaucrat's request over paperwork that needs to be done. But again, farmers are facing an uphill battle right now, especially with the, like you said, older generations are phasing out there, and nobody wants to get into business. That's the reality. Very few people want to get in this business. It's a lifestyle, it's a choice, and the farmers that do it and the farm families are the backbone of our economy, and we can't thank them enough for everything that they do to grow food for us, breaking their backs out there 7 days a week, making sure that we can be fed here in Canada.
Well, I think this sounds harsh, but I think the reality in this country is, at this moment, under this NDP Liberal government, is that it is more profitable to be a regulator than it is to actually do the farming, right? And when we get to the point where it's you're making more money, you have more advantages as a bureaucrat regulating the industry than you do actually providing the food for people to buy. That's a very very dangerous place to be, in my opinion, because you don't have the people actually providing the food, so you're relying on imports again. And if we learned anything during the pandemic, that's an awful place to be.
Absolutely. And during the pandemic, we saw even in our neighbors to the US. So Canada has a very short growing season. Yes, we have some greenhouses that can grow year round, but that's mostly tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. But what we saw was a labor shortage during the pandemic in the States, where they couldn't get the crops off because they didn't have the labor to do so, which meant that we didn't get the imports that we rely on. And the reality is that, you know, when we were kids, we used to go to the grocery store in the winter. You didn't actually get to find things on a shelf like you do year round right now. I remember having to wait for somebody to come back from Florida to bring citrus when it was in season in Florida, because you just didn't get it. But now the way our supply chains are set up, the way we have a global system where we are reliant on food coming from all over the world, including on passenger airplanes as cargo, and ships coming from South Africa, from the Middle East, if you can believe it, from South America. That's where we actually get most of our food from. So, and the reality is we can't grow it all here year round. So if consumers want to see what they see and are used to having all the fruits and vegetables on the shelves of the grocery store year round, we have to find a way and a balance to keep our farmers farming here in Canada, but also to have policies that allow us to have these imports into the country. And the plastics ban that the NDP Liberal government wants on these fresh fruit and vegetables, that's actually going to impede all of those imports that we get. 90% of what plastic does for food to keep it fresh is done before it ever hits the grocery store shelf. And we have lots of rural and northern remote communities that rely on fresh food to be either trucked in. If you're in the Yukon, you're fortunate enough to have it trucked in. If you're in the Northwest Territories or in Nunavut, you're having it flown in. That shelf life has to be extended, or they're going to maybe get 1 or 2 days out of, for instance, a cucumber. When you wrap it in plastic, and the advances in technology that industry has done by innovating the packaging specific to reduce food waste, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to be able to extend the shelf life of fresh berries or fresh food, they should be applauded, not be over-regulated and told we can't have that anymore. Because again, it will increase our food waste by 50% and increase our greenhouse gas emissions, not to mention that plastic weighs less than paper. So when we're talking about paper packaging, a paper bag versus plastic, it's almost 4 to 1 in the weight and the volume that it takes up in transport trucks to transport it across the country as well. And we're not a small country, Jamie. We've got a lot of geography, a lot of miles to cover.
But when you have shortages, food or otherwise, it spikes the price, right? Abundance equals peace. I always keep saying shortage equals conflict, and if you're spiking the price of certain types of food, only the well-to-do will be able to afford that food while the rest of us suffer. Big government loves that, right? You bring everyone else down. It's the
absolutely
plan. It's the path that we seem to be going on with this Liberal NDP government. Anyway, we're way out of time, way over. As you know, the guests get the last word. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. I just want to say once again, thank you to the farmers out there who are working tirelessly to try to get your crops in the ground right now at this time of year, so we can have a bountiful harvest come summer and fall, and we can keep Canadians fed and nutritious with healthy, affordable food.
All right, Leanne Ruth, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I appreciate you talking about your work with agriculture and ensuring we have a strong food supply here in Canada.
Thank you so much.
All right, Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, it's her riding. We thank her for her time. For yours as well, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. New content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Until next week, remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.